So let's go ahead and then talk about popular will. Look at what I did there, Krystal.
Nice one.
Let's move on to the polls segment. So this is something which, look, as you said, take all polls with a grain of salt. But what I think is usually where people are correct is not necessarily on candidates and how they feel. How do you feel about the state of the country? How do you feel about COVID? How do you feel about the state of the economy? How do you feel even about the Supreme Court? And luckily, ABC News went ahead and tested this. So let's put this up there on the screen. So 76% of respondents want Biden to consider all nominees, not just a black woman, a very good indictment of identity politics. 75% say the economy is either not good or poor. Only 1% say excellent. I want you to guess who those 1% of people are. And 50 to 49 1%. Support Biden's approval on COVID. So this is a catastrophe for the White House. Now, the major headline out of this was the indictment of identity politics. Look, I could have told you, when affirmative action goes down in the state of California, the most liberal place, like, it's pretty obvious what's happening in terms of popular will on that issue. But the one where Biden is just so underwater is not just the economy, but especially Krystal and COVID, because his only strength in the past was when COVID was the number one issue, the way his trust numbers on that in 2020 before the election were like 80-20. I mean, they were sky high, but it's even after the vaccine. And even though the economy wasn't doing well, people said, yeah, he's a little iffy on that, but I trust him to handle COVID. Well, now you're at 50-50 on COVID. I mean, when you're there, you've got nothing left, especially because COVID is like third or fourth or sometimes even fifth on the number of people's priorities. So you look especially on how Biden is on the wrong side of COVID. He's on the wrong side of the economy. Here's the other part, in terms of Ukraine, vast majority of people polled said that they did not want to get involved in Ukraine. Shocking. I mean, absolutely shocking. Yeah. Don't worry, though, as we just covered in Dark Money, it's not like popular will is generally expressed here in D.C. And that's where the disconnect between the White House on the way that the country feels about COVID, about the economy, even the identity politics thing on the Supreme Court, the way that everything is focused on here in D.C. is almost always on the opposite side of public opinion. Yeah. So what is the point of voting for these people? I really don't understand it.
The Democratic Party has been completely captured by a small bubble that is like wildly out of step with the American public. I mean, the Supreme Court thing, I don't think it doesn't really matter in terms of how people are ultimately going to vote. But just to give you a sense, this isn't just like white people are mad about Biden only considering a black woman. Only a little more than 1 in 4 non-white Americans want Biden to consider only black women. So the numbers are not that different for people of color versus the entire population.
If color of my skin, I'd be so pissed.
It just, again, and it doesn't really, it's not, there are a lot of qualified black women, and ultimately this isn't going to swing the balance of the court that much, so I can't get that emotionally invested in anyway, but it's just a small signal, again, of how their views on culture and their views on economics have become disconnected from what the broader American public ultimately wants. On the economy, so you have this new line of thought and rationalization here in Washington that apparently is being taken seriously, that the problem is that Biden did too much. Like, what? I mean, that's like the polar opposite of what's going on. People are like, you aren't doing anything. You aren't focused on my problems. You aren't delivering the goods that you said you would deliver. And yet somehow the conventional wisdom has been, Biden went too far. What has he even done in the past year? I mean, we haven't had really anything since the initial checks, and then we got this infrastructure deal that is a nothing burger. I mean, I know they want to sell it as this big deal, but we saw the bridge collapse in Pittsburgh over the weekend when he was there to talk about infrastructure, which was horrifying. And then I went and look up the numbers. We got 230,000 bridges in this country that need major repairs or to be rebuilt entirely. So even this infrastructure deal, okay, fine, it's good. It's better than what we got under Trump in terms of infrastructure. But it's like a drop in the bucket in terms of actually upgrading, actually just refurbishing what we've got, let alone upgrading to the status of what a modern state should be. And that's it. That's all that they've done. So yeah, people are looking at this and going, I feel pessimistic. My paycheck is not going as far as it used to. The other thing I was looking at is rents in some cities have skyrocketed like 40%. So all of the things that really hit the bottom line of working class families, all those prices are going up and up. And what are you doing about it? talk is cheap. Like, let's get some executive orders going. Let's go and call out these CEOs and name and shame them and curb their corporate profits. Another poll that we had looked at before shows that people understand that corporate greed is driving a decent chunk of this inflation. And so you've got a perfect lane there to do something about it, and yet no action. So yeah, Biden is trying to do what Obama tried to do before him, which was to tell people that, no. Let me tell you what's really going on in your economic life. People aren't buying it. Democrats aren't buying it. Republicans aren't buying it. Independents aren't buying it. The Democratic base is completely demoralized, and so you're set up for a bloodbath in the midterms.
Yeah, and I want to explain that concept too about did too much. Well, he did too much on things that don't matter, and then didn't do enough on the things that do matter. He spent enormous amounts of political capital trying to pass Build Back Better, which nobody cared about from day one, got watered down, and eventually Manchin and Sinema just killed it. And now he looks weak, and nothing got done, and it's actually, even if it had, nobody really would have cared. Meanwhile, the price of gas went up by 50%. Meanwhile, the supply chain crisis continues. Actually, it's getting worse in terms of in terms of the container ship problem that I've been tracking pretty closely. People are actually looking at the prices and the skyrocketing in terms of the variability on that. It's a disaster for American shipping companies and ultimately for the end consumer. Same with the grocery store. I mean, look, what the problem is that they're not willing to think out of the box and throw everything at the wall on the stuff that really matters. And when you don't do that, then of course nobody's going to trust you on anything. And on COVID, I cannot emphasize this enough, how out of step they are. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. A majority of voters now believe that COVID should be treated as an endemic disease. But, and here's the problem, majority of Democrats, specifically self-identified Democrats, as in part of the base, say that it should continue to be treated as an emergency. So this is, again, the issue where the 55% or 52% or whatever of the Democratic base, who are dramatically going to be, white, upper-class liberals, suburban liberals, are the people who are driving all policy for everybody and their mindset and the way they approach it and more. This filters down into misery. I went to go see Russell Peters this weekend in Tyson's Corner, Virginia, okay? Virginia does not have a statewide mask mandate, as famously as Glenn Youngkin and all of them showed. In the freaking comedy show, you have people barking at you to keep your mask on if you're not, eating or drinking. And then when you're in line to go to the bathroom, whatever, everyone is screaming at you. First of all, this stupid cloth, okay, I won't say the efficacy of it, given what happened to Dan Bongino. Go look at what the CDC go ahead and says about the efficacy. I'm like, this is, and then, meanwhile, what's happening? Which is that everybody there also had to be vaccinated in order to get in or have a proof of a negative COVID test. I'm like, this is all fake. This is nuts. And yet, when is it going away? This is what I'm saying in terms of their feelings and more cascade down into misery of everybody's lives. And, look, I know people go, it's so hard for Saagar to wear a mask. That's not the point, okay? The point is that it's not going away. I hate it. Everybody else hates it. Nobody has a reasonable end goal, Krystal, in terms of being told what's happening. And the White House is on the other side of that issue.
At the beginning of the pandemic, when Trump was running for re-election, we tracked how the views of the hardcore Republican base and of Trump himself were wildly divergent from what the views of the broader population was. And that this created a problem for him because to keep the base happy, he had to put himself on like 80-20 on the wrong side of issues. The numbers aren't quite that bad in the other direction now, but they're getting that way for Democrats, where the way that the broader population feels is very different from how the loudest and hardest core of the Democratic base ultimately feels. And David Leonhardt in his newsletter this morning for the New York Times actually made a good point. He's like, look, on one side you have Republicans and there's a big problem with vaccine hesitancy that's keeping people from protecting themselves from a disease that at this point is effectively preventable in terms of obviously the most severe consequences. But you have a form of vaccine hesitancy on the Democratic side, which is if you are boosted, double vaxxed and boosted, which I am, and you still feel like you are at this tremendous risk, what you're effectively saying is like, I don't actually believe this vaccine worked.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's the message that you've internalized and that you're putting out there in the world with your actions. And that in and of itself is a form of vaccine hesitancy. And I thought that was an interesting way to think of it. Now, I think that the type of vaccine hesitancy where you don't get the vaccine and you leave yourself vulnerable and at risk to severe illness is a more damaging type of vaccine hesitancy. But it is a similar strain of thought where you are not actually grappling with what the real risks are based on your status as a vaccinated and boosted person. So ultimately, yeah, this creates, political conflict. And I think Biden has not really known how to navigate this. He certainly hasn't leaned into new lockdowns. He hasn't leaned into national masking mandates and these sorts of things. But there hasn't been any sort of clear messaging about, okay, what's the endpoint? What does this look like? What is back to normal? How do we get there? Or putting pressure, he's the leader of the Democratic Party, putting pressure on politicians down the line to sort of fall in line with, okay, this is the direction we're going in, and this is how we're going to continue to live with this disease, which is now effectively endemic and is going to be here in one form or another in perpetuity.
There you go. Just accept it.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.